when I get someone cornered and they have to listen to me, I love it. It's my favorite thing. And so I have a captive audience. It's great. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Fallon Brooks, and I have been with Oklahoma Atheists since October of 2011. I've been an atheist since November 17th of 2010. And I know that that's a really specific date, and there is a story behind that, and it does kind of tie into tonight's topic because some of what I'm going to talk about was my partial reasoning for leaving my faith behind. So we will get into that. So for those of you who don't know why you're here tonight, we're going to be talking about developmental sexual disorders, more specifically AIS, or androgen insensitivity syndrome. Sorry, I lost my place. I'm going to preface everything I'm going to say tonight with, I am not a biologist, I am not a doctor, I am not a psychologist, I'm not a sociologist, so I've got this. So everyone read it, take it to heart. I am not a scientist. So that being said, you may be wondering, what in the heck makes you qualified to talk about this? Well, I am an AIS patient. I have androgen insensitivity syndrome. Androgen insensitivity syndrome, just kind of the quick and dirty before we get started, is where basically the fetus is genetically male with an XY, a 46XY karyotype. And obviously, I'm not a dude. So, so we're going to kind of talk about how that happens, what the biological processes are that cause the formation of male sex organs to be inhibited and how we become female instead. And also what that means for us, for AIS patients emotionally, also socially, and how that sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Wow, I just totally went blank. I am so sorry. I'm going to talk a little bit about how that affects our social constructs of gender, sexuality, that sort of thing. So AIS is lumped into a category known as DSDs, or developmental sexual disorders. Where did they go? Sorry, I have a lot of notes, and because I'm not a scientist, I will be reading a lot. A lot of this is just information that is way beyond me, so in order to make sure that I give you guys kind of the proper terminology and everything, I will be looking down a lot. So I'm really sorry in advance. So AIS, or intersex, which AIS is lumped into a category known as, like I said before, disorder of sexual development, most commonly referred to as an intersex condition. So what does intersex mean? It's an abnormality, it's an ambiguity of the gender, or, hi, feedback, okay. So one word that is used a lot that is just really misleading and absolutely not at all what it sounds like is the word hermaphrodite. So, right? I was so proud of my Justin Bieber joke, like you don't even know. Get it? Because he kind of looks like a girl. Yeah. So, we're going to talk about what a hermaphrodite is first, and why that is relevant to this, because I am not a hermaphrodite. We know that in the classical sense of what people think of that word as, they think of it as being someone who has both male and female sex organs and can impregnate themselves. That's not possible. So in biology, hermaphrodite is an organism that has reproductive organs normally associated with both male and female sexes. And in many groups, there's not a separate sex. They can really kind of take either role, male or female, in the reproductive process. And as far as I know, and again, I'm not a scientist, I don't think that there's any animal other than a worm, I believe a worm maybe possibly, where they can impregnate themselves. I think it always takes two. Could be wrong. Again, not a scientist. So, many groups of animals don't have separate sexes. In these groups, hermaphroditism is a normal condition enabling a form of sexual reproduction in which both partners can act as male or female. like I said, sorry I'm repeating myself. Majority of snails and slugs. It's also found in some fish species and, to a lesser degree, some vertebrates, but not many. Historically, the term hermaphrodite has also been used to describe ambiguous genitalia in human beings, and the word entered the English lexicon in the 15th century, and it's derived from the Greek hermaphroditos, which is a combination of the Greek gods Aphrodite and Hermes. So the word intersex, like I said before, is kind of the preferred sort of terminology, and mostly because the word hermaphrodite is very misleading and stigmatizing in a lot of ways. When someone with my condition hears the word hermaphrodite, it's like, oh my God, that's so horrible. It's really an insult. And just case in point, I was a freshman here at the University of Central Oklahoma, and my freshman biology professor, we were touching on genetics and things of that nature, and he actually, in the book, there was like a little caption in the bottom left-hand corner that said, androgen sensitivity syndrome, and it had this really horrible picture of like these two naked women with their eyes blurred out, and just really a terrible representation of what androgen sensitivity is about. And I'll never forget the words he used. He said, androgen sensitivity syndrome is an inverted hermaphrodite. And I was sitting there thinking, this man is a doctor. He has a doctorate, and he's teaching biology at a pretty big university here in Oklahoma. I was really offended, and I walked out of class that day. And I wrote him a very angry email, and I told him how ignorant he was, that I was never coming back to his class. And I did go back to his class because I kind of couldn't afford to fail it. So, you know, you gotta kind of suck up your pride and go. But he did apologize to me, and he did allow me to kind of inform him a little bit on it, and he kind of informed the class that he had made a mistake and didn't call me out. So that was really good. So hermaphrodites in terms of human gender and sexuality, not real. We've totally covered that. We all know the difference between male and female at a really early age. You know, when you're, playing in the sandbox, that that's a boy and I'm a girl and that sort of thing. What we don't learn about is the many variations in between male and female. They're these two very opposite ends of the spectrum, and it's such a black and white terminology. And this is an Albert Dürer painting, and I love it just because it's kind of Adam and Eve sort of thing. But male and female is sort of all that we know. And we don't really realize the gray area in between. And as we all know, life occurs in the gray areas, right? In this gap between male and female, there are multiple conditions. One of them is called Swyer syndrome, which I'm going to cover a little bit. It's very similar to AIS with a key component missing in the very beginning of fetal development, and that is a 46XY karyotype. There's also androgen insensitivity syndrome, which is what I have and what we're talking about, and Klinefelter syndrome, which is a 47XXY, and there's a lot of others in between. We're not going to cover that one because I'm not familiar with it. But just FYI, it's out there, it exists. So we're going to start with a little bit of remedial biology. You may be kind of wondering, like, what are all these letters? If you failed high school biology, listen to me. Men have a 46XY karyotype, meaning they have 23 pairs of chromosomes comprising of an X and a Y. Women are a 46XX karyotype comprising of 23 pairs of X chromosomes. So knowing this, we know that women will always pass on an X chromosome, and men will kind of really determine the sex of the baby by passing on either an X or a Y. Sorry, I've been sick for a lot of days now, and so I'm actually amazed that I'm not sounding like a prepubescent boy at the moment. Because I spent most of the day sounding like a frog, so I'm really amazed at myself right now. In androgen insensitivity, There's an interruption of the fetal development of the reproductive system. In AIS, a child is conceived with the XY sex chromosomes, and embryonic testes, testicles, balls, y'all, will develop in the fetus. And what happens is, on the Y chromosome, there's what is called a sex-determining region of the Y chromosome. And it will, sorry, I almost dropped that. It will pass on what is called an anti-Müllerian hormone or Müllerian inhibitory factor. It really depends on what you're reading that talks about it. Müllerian is any female structure in the reproductive system. Müllerian would be your, like the uterus, what are those little tubes called? Oh, fallopian tubes. Oh, awesome, you guys were listening. Okay, so fallopian tubes and the uterus, and thank you so much. Hey, sweet, you got me a water. All those sort of structures, that's Müllerian. Wolffian structures would be the male version, the epididymis, the seminal vesicles, that sort of thing. And we also know that, you know, the penis in the male and in the female is the clitoris, and they're very similar structures. So when someone has what I have, which is a 46XY karyotype, it's an X-linked characteristic. So what happens is mom passes on the X, and her genetic coding, I guess, there's like a little receptor that fails to go off. And it basically says that, like, hey, I know you've already said let's suppress the Müllerian structures, but also we're going to suppress the Wolffian structures. So what happens is everything kind of continues along the female line of development. And so you may have wondered at some point in your life, like, why do dudes have nipples? It is the weirdest thing, right? Well, it's because the basic human form in the womb is female. And it's really interesting because a lot of people don't really know that. And so that's kind of the default setting. When things fail to occur, then it defaults to that mode. And so depending on the level of sensitivity to androgens, you can have anywhere between a functioning male who is sterile to a non-functioning, sterile, externally functioning female, like myself. So there's like a whole grade, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But because this is an X-linked characteristic, it is a recessive on the mother's side, and so she has a 1 in 2 chance, if she's a carrier, like my mother is a carrier, she has a 1 in 2 chance of having a completely unaffected daughter or carrier daughter, and a 1 in 2 chance of having an unaffected son or an affected son, like myself. Technically, I'm an affected son because I am an XY karyotype. So these carriers, women can be tested to see if they're carriers or not. In my family, my sister was not a carrier, so her children, all completely normal and okay. My mom only had 2 kids. She had a daughter and technically a son. So she passed on the X chromosome that was affected once. In my family, my grandmother was a carrier, and she passed on the carrier gene to my mom, but she never had any affected sons. Everybody was normal, able to reproduce, all that. My great-grandmother was obviously also a carrier, and I had a great-aunt who was also affected, but that's really the only incidence in the family. None of my cousins are carriers. None of my cousins have affected children, obviously, if they're not carriers. So it's interesting. There are a lot of women who are carriers and don't know it, but it's really a 1 in 4 chance of having it happen. So it's pretty good odds, actually. So with that being said, what else? I missed something. Also, in 1/3 of cases of androgen insensitivity, it is a random mutation. So that does happen. You know, random mutation just occurs. We know that. If you know anything about genetics, you know that it's not always guaranteed that everything's going to be normal. So The first known step of sexual differentiation of normal XY fetus in the development is the development of testicles. The early stages of testicular formation in the second month of gestation requires the action of several genes. So now I'm going to kind of go a little more into what I talked about earlier, which was the Müllerian inhibitor and the Wolffian structures and all that sort of thing. So when a gene is defective, the indifferent gonads fail to differentiate into testes in an XY genetically male fetus. Without testicles, no testosterone, and no anti-Müllerian hormone is produced. So that would be in a normal female, there's no testicles. So no anti-Müllerian hormone is produced, and then everything kind of goes along the female lines as it's supposed to. So that's in an XX individual. Now, this is where we're going to talk about Swyer syndrome real briefly. The difference between AIS and Swyer syndrome is that in Swyer syndrome, there is not an anti-Müllerian hormone produced. So all of the female structures, all of the Müllerian structures actually still occur. And so those women will have vaginal canal that's connected to the cervix and the uterus, and they'll have fallopian tubes, but they don't have any ovaries, and neither do they have testicles. They just kind of have these streak gonads that are just kind of asexual. So they are unable to reproduce. And the difference between that and what I have is that my mom's X chromosome sent out the testicles that were formed because of the X chromosome, or the Y chromosome. The anti-Müllerian inhibitor did come along and say, no, don't form any of those. And so what happens is, aren't these fun? I feel like I'm in middle school again. Everyone get a giggle. There's a penis on the screen. So you look at some of these structures. The fallopian tube and the vas deferens, very similar in structure. And then also testicle versus ovary, those are the gonads. I actually never realized that nads was actually like the shortened version of, anybody remember like when you were in middle school, it's like they kicked him in the nads. So that's kind of where that comes from. Don't mind me, I'm not an adult, I just play one between 8 and 5. So the nitty gritty, I'm going to tell you guys a lot here, and it's a little embarrassing because I'm talking about myself. So what happens in the Müllerian inhibitor is that it doesn't allow anything from here up to develop. So basically, a woman who has what I have will have just a vaginal canal, just an opening. And here's the problem with that. For some women, it will be very adequate in length. It'll be, 8, 12 inches long. And it can also expand. It's muscle contraction and all that fun stuff. But some women will have a completely imperforate one. And they have to have very painful, horrible, awful surgeries and or dilation, depending on what is there. So when I was diagnosed, so just really briefly, I'll talk about it more later, but when I was diagnosed, I was scared to death because I realized, oh my gosh, I'm going to have these awful surgeries. One of them, and I forget what the method is called, but they take a dilator that kind of looks like a little miniature penis, and they will insert that into the vaginal dimple or opening or whatever, and then it's tied to like these kind of strings or cables really, and they will implant these little things kind of up here in the abdomen, and over time they slowly tighten it, and it pulls it, right? That's so awesome and gross and painful, and it will tighten it over time, and it'll kind of pull up in there and it'll stretch and create a vaginal canal, making that patient physically capable of sexual intercourse. So, let's see. Then there's also just manual dilation, so that's kind of, to me, sounds a little more fun, because you get to do it on your own. I am so glad I have a room full of perverts. This is awesome. We have a hand up here. Talk to me. I'm single. Oh, goodness. Okay, so a baby who's externally girl, is born normal in all anatomic respects, except that the child will have non-functional testicles. And sometimes what will happen is there will be no indication that there's a problem until puberty, and then what happens is there fails to be menses, or she doesn't have her period, for those of you who aren't down with the lingo. So when she fails to start a period, usually 14, 15, something like that, there's usually concern like, something's not right here, let's look into it. Other times it can be found, and I think, not sure if I have the right slide coming. Forgive me if this is really gruesome and doesn't make sense. Okay, no. All right. So, did you guys see that? It's so awesome. Okay. Okay. So now, apparently I know what my next slide is now. So there are grades of androgen insensitivity ranging in grade from 1 to 7. A grade 1 will be a fully functional male. He will have a penis. He will have testicles that do descend. And clearly functional, but because his body does not respond to androgens on a very small scale, he may be sterile. He may have a little body hair, stuff like that. As you can see, as it goes further along the scale, it's a lot more severe. And I actually had an actual image of an AIS grade 4 patient, but it was really gruesome, and I didn't want to freak you guys out too much, so I took it off. But if anybody really wants to see it, I have it on my printed slide here. It's kind of cool. And really unfortunate also. So as you go further along, you get to the grade 6 and 7, which is everything appearing completely normal from the outside. 9 times out of 10, these girls are not diagnosed until obviously much later, like in puberty. So I myself am a high grade 6. The only difference between a grade 6 and a grade 7 is grade 7 has no body hair at all. It's kind of creepy and kind of awesome at the same time, because who wants to shave? Oh my gosh. So if you're into that sort of thing. These women are typically pretty fully functional sexually. Not always. Sometimes there is a little bit of, it's maybe too shallow, a vaginal canal, something like that, so they have to expand it by the really cool means where they have to do the implant and all that. Or, I'm kidding. Well, not kidding, but. So you can see like when something like that, when you're told that you have this condition, you kind of freak out and you kind of hide. So next, this is a really kind of gruesome picture. One way that it is found out prior to puberty is there can be an inguinal hernia, and this is where the testicles drop into the inguinal canal, and that's kind of grody, huh? So, I'll turn it, you guys look totally disgusted. So there are some women, famous women, who, television, music, film, who suffer from AIS, and Jamie Lee Curtis is really a speculation. A lot of people say she has it. You know, it's one of those, well, I have a friend who has a cousin whose brother works at the doctor's office where Jamie Lee went like 30 years ago, that sort of thing. But it's been a very persistent rumor over the years. As a matter of fact, when I was diagnosed, that was who my doctor very specifically told me was a public figure who had it. Eden Atwood is probably one of the most prominently outspoken figures who has AIS. She's a jazz singer. She has an amazing voice. And a little bit later, we're going to see a video clip from Good Morning America about Eden Atwood. And she's going to kind of tell her story a little bit. And she's just an amazing lady. Erica Coimbra, she was a volleyball player on the Brazilian team for the Sydney Olympics in 2000. And it was pretty public. There was her and another girl, I can't remember the name. They both publicly came out and said, I have androgen insensitivity syndrome. And it was really unfortunate because a lot of their opponents and things like that, you know, really railed against them and called them dudes and that sort of thing. And hey, that does not look like a dude. She's hot. So it's really unfortunate because there's a lot of ignorance there. And also, you probably remember the more recent, in 2010, Caster Semenya from South Africa. And she was, I guess they tested her and found out that she had really high levels of testosterone. And they took away her medals and all that, and there was this very public sort of humiliation, and it came out that she had some sort of intersex condition, which I'm not positive is AIS, but I've been told that it's most likely AIS just from the things we've heard. She's obviously not the most feminine looking person. Part of that is that she is, look at her, she's cut. I wish I had arms like that. But she's a trained athlete, so that's part of it. The other part of it is that it's genetics. Sometimes I've seen when I might tell someone what I have, they'll kind of be scanning my face for like, oh, she does look like a dude. Right? No. I got my big nose from my dad. I got my big chin from my dad. I'm tall because all the men on my dad's side of the family are very tall. Which, that is a Y-linked characteristic, but, I could have gotten that from my dad's X chromosome. So, So Caster Semenya is really unfortunate. Later on, they did give her medals back, and she was able to kind of come out publicly a little bit, and they did a little makeover for her, and she kind of was like, I'm a girl, and I really was pretty happy with how South Africa kind of rallied behind her, and they said, she's our girl. And so you can find some really cool pictures of her having been made over, and she actually managed to look pretty feminine. So one thing I forgot to mention before I switch slides is, so when they tested her and they found that she had a high level of testosterone in her system, here's the problem with that. Because she has androgen insensitivity syndrome, her body does not respond to those androgens. So she may have a high level of them, but her body can't utilize them. So the body will turn it into something useful, usually androgens, or not androgens, estrogens. So that's why a lot of women who have AIS don't typically look like this. She's an athlete, probably works out a lot, that sort of thing. Most women are very voluptuous, very curvy, very obviously female, almost like super female. So I'm a superwoman. Yes. Like I said, there are a lot of famous women, public figures that have this, and it occurs in about 1 in every 20,000 live XY births, meaning 1 in every 20,000 live male births, technically male. So given the current population of the United States at 313 million people, there are approximately a little less than 10,000 women living in the U.S. today with this disorder. So just to break it down a little bit more, Oklahoma City metro population is about 1 million people. So that means that there are about 50 women in the metro area just like me. That kind of makes me feel a lot better. Some famous women in the past who've been said to probably have had AIS, Joan of Arc, never had children, was kind of a masculine figure. Also Queen Elizabeth I may have been androgen insensitive. You guys can check that out. It's a little historical, kind of an interesting thing. And it kind of, to me, the thing I love about history sometimes is you can kind of find that some of these people had so many other things about them than what their public status was. And so it's just a little interesting side note if you want to research that a little bit. So we're going to go on to me. I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about my story. How cute am I, right? Aww. So this in the middle is me at 3 years old, or I think, yeah, 3, and I'm 8 in the top right, and then this was 26, about 100 pounds ago. So this is me. I'm going to leave this up for a little while just so you guys don't have to look at icky pictures of vaginas and such. So at the age of 14, I was diagnosed with androgen insensitivity syndrome. And how that happened was I got really, really sick. I lost a lot of weight, and my doctor was really concerned. So they did a CT scan of the lower portion of my body, and they discovered that I had a parasite that was eating the lining of my stomach. Right? Really gross. So I lost a lot of weight. I couldn't keep food down. But when they did the CT scan, they also found that I had a mass in my abdomen. And then they began to ask me all these questions like, have you started your period, that sort of thing. And you know, when you're a 14-year-old girl, you're like, shut up, no. And you know, you don't want them to press further into that. You're like, I'm just a late bloomer, leave me alone. So they sent me, after they took care of the stomach parasite, they sent me to an OBGYN who was the most ignorant, horrible, awful man I have ever met in my life. He examined me, 14 years old, never had anybody looking at my naughty bits, and he puts me up on the table, and you know, I'll never forget this. I had to stare at a poster of Garth Brooks on the ceiling. Right? Definitely wasn't having sexual thoughts, I'll tell you that. So they did the exam, and the horrible thing about this is that he just did a digital exam, and then he, you know, like this, and then puts his hand on my abdomen and goes, feels like everything's there. Tickle, tickle. And totally mortified, absolutely painful, excruciating, embarrassing experience. And then he came out and he said, he tells my mother, you know, everything is fine, I think she's just a late bloomer. You know, mind you, I had been really sick for months, I lost a lot of weight, my clothes were really baggy, I was really pretty uncomfortable all the time because my stomach hurt, so I was wearing really baggy jeans and a t-shirt that day. And so he said to my mom, well, you know, she kind of looks like she might be a tomboy. I think she's suffering from a sexual identity disorder. So he prescribed me Zoloft. And luckily my mom is a smart cookie. And she went, no, you're an idiot. So she threw all that out. And I went to another doctor who said, yeah, something's not right. She looked at the scans and she tried to do an exam, and I absolutely wouldn't let her because obviously scarred for life here. And so they sent me to a specialist where they did a karyotyping test. And I was told that I was born without a uterus, and because of that, my vaginal canal did not connect. And so they said that, you know, because of that, everything else, you know, could become cancerous because it's not functioning. So they basically told me it had a little cancer scare. Didn't tell me the full extent of everything, and I had karyotype. Oh, that's wrong. That's really scary. Oh my gosh. Okay, so this. Sorry, I have another order. Okay, so this is basically what they took out of me. This is not mine. I couldn't find the picture, although I do have it somewhere. This is basically the lump of everything that had formed. Mine looked more. Mine kind of had a tube wrapped around it. These are the undescended testicles that were removed from some AIS patient, I don't know who. So here it is. So this was my karyotyping test, and I ran across this at a much later age. I was 19, I was in college, and my mom had left me this folder full of paperwork, medical documents and things. And I came across this, and I saw at the top, patient Fallon Brooks, karyotype 46XY, normal karyotype, male. I had a nervous breakdown. I wanted to kill myself. That was the most horrible feeling. And the video that I'm going to show you guys a little bit later with Eden Atwood, she talks about how if she had been misled and been told that, you know, oh, it's this, if it was so horrible that they couldn't tell her, then it's too horrible to let anyone else know. And so imagine finding this out at a later date and coming to the realization that you are a freak of nature. And that was absolutely how I felt. And so because of that, it took a lot of years for me to really come to terms with that. And so what I did, because rewind a little, I was 14 when I was diagnosed, and I was told, you may have to have some surgery to be able to have sex. And that was mortifying in and of itself, plus the whole thing with the doctor. I didn't want anybody to look at my naughty bits. So I just decided, you know what, I'll just be celibate forever. And so I hid behind my religion. And I became very active in the whole abstinence thing, and, you know, preached it to groups of teenagers just like myself. And all the while just being like, see, I'm a good Christian girl, which what it really was I was just scared, very scared to face the truth. And obviously, finding this at a later age made it worse. It made it just, I sunk into depression and didn't want to face it. So that that went on until I was about 26 years old. At 26, I thought, okay, well, I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to be able to face this problem. So I'm just going to make a life for myself. I bought a house, and the day I closed on my house, I went and I cried. For hours, I laid face down on my living room floor. And I felt the weight of that, and I realized that I was all alone, and I was always going to be that way. And, sorry. Gosh, mood is just kind of depressing. So sorry. I promise you I'm really happy now, so we'll get to that one soon. So I'm going to go to slide 10 so you guys can look at fun pictures again. So it's not as depressing as the XY thing. So I sunk further and further into depression because I felt like I'm going to be alone forever. The more and more I prayed, and the more and more I sought for God to kind of alleviate the suffering there, the worse it got. And I thought if ever there was a prayer God should have answered, it was that one. And so that started to lead me away from my faith. And as that year, 2010, kind of drove on, I got to about September, October, and I said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I need to face the problem. I don't want to be alone forever. I want to know what can I do to be a normal, functioning adult woman. And so I went to my doctor, and I sat on the table and bawled like a little baby girl, and I told him everything, and I said, this is what I have. Please fix it. Please tell me what I have to do. And so he sent me to a specialist. And I should say, over the years, I had made several appointments to see doctors about it, to be examined and all that sort of thing. And anytime I told them about the condition, the reaction I was met with was typically like, oh, that's really cool, tell me all about it. And I kind of felt like this science experiment. I even had one doctor say, oh, on the day that we do your exam, do you mind if I have a couple of medical students come in? Yeah, it happens. So obviously I didn't show up to that appointment. I didn't show up to a lot of appointments over the years. And so this time I just went in as a walk-in, and I said, I want you to look at my hoo-ha. And I want you to tell me what's wrong with it and how I can fix it. And so he sent me to a specialist. And this is super personal, but you guys are going to love it because it's really funny. I went to a specialist who dealt with OBGYN, disorders, urology, that sort of thing. And he got me up on the table. He was probably the best doctor I've ever seen, really understanding, really nice and gentle. And so I'm up on the table. They've got the little sheet covering my legs and everything, and he puts a speculum in, and he pulls his head out, and he goes, I'd say you're adequate. Yeah. Then puts his head back under there and does a couple things, and then goes, generous even. And so I'm laying on the table at this point laughing hysterically, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I've wasted so much of my life. Okay guys. I wasn't like, I'm going to get down. It wasn't like that at all. It was just coming to the realization that I was functional. I wasn't going to have a problem in the future meeting someone and having a normal, functioning sex life. And so that really empowered me to begin to put myself out there. However, that was in October of 2010, and it was a month later that I was in my Wednesday night Bible study, and the topic was prayer. And this is not the topic of the night, so I'm not really going to go over it a whole lot, but I'll just kind of tell you guys real quick. The topic was prayer, and I had a really hard time figuring out exactly what it was that I wanted to say. They said, talk about a time in your life when you felt like God answered a big prayer for you. And I just sat there sweating bullets thinking, I can't think of a time. And when it came around to me, I said, I can't think of a time. And everyone in the room just looked at me completely horrified because I had been their small group leader for quite some time. And so they're just like, what is wrong with her? And so then they all laid hands on me and prayed and everything. And then I walked out that night and I sat in my car and I went, I don't believe this anymore. And I said out loud to myself, I'm an atheist. And that was November 17th of 2010. So there you go. That's the very specific. And the way AIS tied into that was, for so many years, I really was just hiding behind religion because I didn't want to have to face the reality of the condition that I have. Because I was really afraid I was going to have to, you know, remember the thing with the tightening, the, right? Oh, horrible. I did not want to have to face that. So after that happened, I met someone, and my very first boyfriend at 27 years old, and he lived with me for a while, so put two and two together. Things happened. We did not sleep in separate rooms. And I will tell you that that was probably the most validating thing to have ever occurred in my life, not only as a woman, but as a human being. I finally felt like I was a person. I felt complete, and I know that sounds silly. Some religious people might say that, well, you weren't complete because you didn't really have Jesus. I really did, I promise. I really believed in all that. But what I was lacking was the ability to see myself as a human being in regards to the most basic of how we understand ourselves, the most basic component of how we understand ourselves, which is, hi, my name is Fallon, and I'm a girl. Because for a lot of years I didn't really know. Kind of felt, you know, a little lost out there. So now, I'm in a completely different place. I'm standing in front of a group of people telling you guys about my vagina. And I never thought this would happen. And I can tell you that I'm so happy today, and I'm just really pleased with, you know, kind of how things have come about. So, with all that being said, we'll talk a little bit about how the social construct of gender affects us. So gender in our society is very one-dimensional. Girls like pink, boys like blue, girls like to go shopping and put on makeup and wear mommy's high heels, and boys like to play in the dirt and climb trees and just generally be gross. Does anybody remember those little, what were those, the creepy crawlies where they had the little, you know, girls had like the Easy Bake Oven, and boys had the thing where they could like make little gelatinous worms and they could hide it in their sister's hair, that kind of thing. Boys are just gross. I'm kidding. I think that's a social construct we learn from a very young age, how we're supposed to act. So clearly, having some ambiguity occurring naturally in situations like mine, like AIS, there's a challenge to exactly what it is that it means to be male or female. Where's the cutoff? What makes someone male? What makes them female? You know, there are conditions like gender dysphoria, which would be transsexuality. Those people are typically classified as someone who is genetically and physically one sex and emotionally and mentally another. And I think it's a real struggle for those people. And some of them get to a point in their lives where they just want to change it, and they'll undergo a reassignment surgery, and they become, you know, if they were born male, they will become female, and a lot of times they feel a lot more whole and complete, much like I did when I finally was able to embrace the fact that I was generous even. So, you know, so we have these sort of things going on, and yet our society is built around the very black and white male-female sort of thing, and so how that ties into my situation is, you know, my birth certificate says I'm a girl, and so I'm legally allowed to marry a man, but I'm genetically male. So where's the cutoff? How does that affect it? And so, is it because I don't have a penis and it's okay for me to marry a dude? What makes it okay versus not okay for someone who underwent a surgical transformation, or someone who just loves someone of the same sex? There's, you know, so we have this big debate in America today for gay marriage, and personally, just my personal opinion, I think that a lot of people who are so against it aren't aware of conditions like this, and aren't aware that sexuality is not that black and white. So one thing that affects really the social construct of this, and it really affected my view of it, was in Genesis. I love Bible verses. In the book of Genesis 1:26 and 27, it says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. There is no male, female, and somewhere in between. So society is built on. And obviously that really affects how we perceive sex and gender. We don't take into account all of these sort of middle ground options that occur naturally. Emotionally, we learn from a very young age to be defensive about our gender. Every descriptive sentence regarding the individual person will carry a masculine or a feminine adjective. On the playground, he took that ball from me. She is, I don't know, has a really ugly skirt. I have no idea. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. So we learn to identify one way or the other. It's not necessarily bad. It's just the norm. But when someone doesn't fit this norm, it can be absolutely devastating to that person because your entire identity, who you are, is built around, I'm a girl, I'm a boy. So say someone who has what I have, which is a grade 7, if it's approached properly and they're offered counseling and things like that, which I wasn't, and I will say I can understand a lot of times when parents are faced with something like this, they don't understand it, they've never heard of it, and so their idea is let's hide it, let's sweep it under the rug, because it's kind of the mama bear syndrome. It's kind of, well, I'm going to protect my child because I don't want them to have this sort of identity crisis. I'll tell them when they're older. But it really kind of has the opposite effect because when they find out at a later age, it completely shakes the foundation upon which that person's view of themselves is built. It did mine. So a lot of times parents who are faced with the strong emotion of discovering something like this may be tempted to operate away the problem. So that would be in a situation such as, if I can go back here a little bit. Oh, hi, balls. Just kidding. So when you've got someone who's, say, born grade 3, grade 4, who maybe has what looks like a really large clitoris and an imperfect vagina, that person might, from the onset, the doctors and surgeons might say, you know what, this person is never going to function as a male because who wants to have a really tiny ween, for lack of a better word. So they may assign that patient a female gender, and they will actually create for them a neo-vagina surgically. And what happens in some of these cases is later on in life, they'll realize something's not right. I don't identify with this gender that I was given. I had no say in this. And actually, I believe in Germany right now, they're trying to make it illegal to assign gender to an ambiguously gendered child prior to the child being at the age where they can understand it and make that decision for themselves. And I think that that's important, and it probably needs to occur in America, but clearly we have more important things to do, like personhood. So just a couple of quick stories, I guess. In 2002, there was a teenager who was assigned a female sex as a baby. Her parents put her in a psychiatric hospital later on because she became very aggressive. And that was because she didn't know about her diagnosis, but she felt that something wasn't right. And the doctors were like, there's nothing wrong with her emotionally, mentally. And they told the parents, you need to tell her about the diagnosis. And so this person lived 37 years as a man. And it turned out later on when, at 37 years old, this patient went in to say, I don't identify with this gender, I want a sexual reassignment surgery. And so when they went in to do that surgery, they found all the internal structures of a female. I'm sorry, I think I've confused two different stories here. Yeah. I'm sorry, you guys are probably like, what is wrong with her? Oh my gosh. Forget the first one. So we had a little baby girl, or a little baby boy. Okay, so here's what it was. I'm sorry. My notes confused me. I totally got off track. Okay, so a little boy was born and had a really what it was just a really large clitoris. And so they said, it's a boy, and they raised this child as a boy. And as the years went on, they had a hard time convincing the child to wear boy clothes and all that. And as he got older, he was like cross-dressing, that sort of thing. and at 37 years of age went in for sexual reassignment surgery. And at that point said, oh my gosh, guess what? You have all these female internal structures. You're actually already a female. And so all they had to do was make everything externally match. And that person was a functional, normal woman. And 37 years of life living as the wrong gender and knowing it, but being told, no, you're a dude.